Good evening, and thank you for being here. I'm Erica Phillips, the Connecticut Mirror's State Policy Editor, and I'm excited to welcome you to the kickoff of a new series, This Could Work. Over the next few months, I'll be sitting down with some of Connecticut's most successful entrepreneurs. We'll be exploring their origin stories, finding out how they earned their first dollar, and most importantly, asking why Connecticut was the place to make it happen. Many thanks to Stamford's Ferguson Library for hosting us this evening and for supporting this event, as they will be for all of the future dates in this series. Just a note that this event is being recorded and the video will be posted to our website, ctmirror.org. The Connecticut Mirror is the state's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom and a trusted source for in-depth news and reporting on public policy, government, and politics. You can read all of our journalism on our site for free, but we rely on our readers to support our mission. Almost 90% of Connecticut Mirror revenue is donated by individuals and organizations who read and rely on our reporting. So thank you for your donations. Some coming attractions. In future events in this series, we'll be speaking with the founders of Athletic Brewing in Milford, Bill Schufelt and John Walker. New Haven native Jason Sobosinski of Haven Hot Chicken and a host of other food enterprises, and with Felicia Rubenstein of the co-working space Haven in Darien. You can find out more information about these dates and register to attend at our website, again, ctmirror.org. All right, let's begin. Tonight we start with our guest, Andre Swanston. Originally from the Bronx, Andre first came to Connecticut to attend the Hotchkiss School. I love that. And then went on to become a proud UConn grad. He was an entrepreneur even then, as you'll hear, but his big break came with the company he built around how we all stream and consume entertainment online, True Optic. With the proceeds from the multi-million-dollar sale of that enterprise, he's now founded the Swanston organization right here in Stamford, and he's paying it forward with a host of investments in entrepreneurs and entertainment in Connecticut and beyond, including a big investment in top-level soccer, which I think a lot of people here are interested in, as I very much am. Welcome, Andre.
Thank you, thank you.
So, I mentioned you're from the Bronx. Let's start there. Were you entrepreneurial as a kid? What was the family like? Was the family entrepreneurial?
So my dad was entrepreneurial. My parents came here from St. Kitts and Nevis, which has the distinction of being the smallest country in the United Nations. So small island, sister island nation in the Caribbean. And I always remember my dad working a lot of jobs. So he had his main job, which was the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. But then he was selling comforters and bedspreads. He was a musician and traveling, and it was just always things. So I would say I got the entrepreneurial spirit from my dad. Yeah.
Education was important to your family. Tell me about that. Tell me about, did you have to work pretty hard in school growing up? And I know you landed at Hotchkiss, so it must have worked pretty hard.
So education was kind of drilled into me. You didn't really have a choice, so I was a kid that I didn't play outside on weekdays. I wasn't allowed to watch TV till my homework was done. It was always looked at as like not just education as an opportunity, but as a responsibility, right? You'd always hear it sounded cliche as a kid, but now as an adult, it resonates a lot more, and you kind of get it, and you're more appreciative for it. But it was the story of, it was so hard for me where I came from. I had nothing when I grew up, and I work hard to give you and your sister an opportunity, and you have to excel at school, and education is the great equalizer, my dad would always say. And sometimes it's overwhelming and so forth. But I think I can remember as young back as like third, fourth grade, where I kind of knew that the expectation was that I had to excel and I had to be something. My dad used to talk about the evolution of the family, right? And that your only responsibility in life is to give one day to be able to give your kids more opportunity than your parents gave you. It really doesn't matter like how much money you make. It doesn't matter what your specific profession is, but like your only responsibility in life is evolution of the family. Like I remember that as young as like 10 years old, having that conversation, and a big stepping stone or catalyst to that evolution is excelling academically. And so you talk about the Hotchkiss School, but you know, you don't get from my neighborhood in the Bronx a scholarship in the Hotchkiss School. Like it just doesn't happen organically, or just like, oh, hey, you just show up one day. I was in a program called Prep for Prep in New York City, which, in New York City public schools, they had something back then called the Gifted and Talented program. So, you know, instead of having 35 kids in your class, maybe there was 25 kids in your class, and it was a little bit more rigorous academically. And pretty much everybody I went to PS 46 in the Bronx, and I went to PS 246 in the Bronx after that. Um, um, you would take the test for prep. It was just, I don't even remember why. It was just a thing. Everybody had to take the test. And with prep for prep, you would, once you get accepted, you would go to class after school down in Manhattan at the Trinity School on Wednesday evenings. You'd go to school all day Saturday. So this is fifth grade. Then in the summer between fifth grade and sixth grade, you go to school for, I think, 7 or 8 weeks, 5 days a week. In the summer. Then again in sixth grade, and then again the summer after. And then you got scholarships to like all the best day schools in New York City. So then I had the opportunity to go to the Allen Stevenson School on the Upper East Side. And so, you know, long story short, 12 years old, after doing 2 summer schools and going to night school and weekend school during the school year, great. I get to walk 15 minutes to the train station and then commute an hour on the subway by myself to, like, you know, this ritzy all-boy prep school in Manhattan. So then you're there for 3 years, and then I end up at Hotchkiss.
Okay. Yeah. So the foundations of a pretty strict work ethic were there from an early age.
Yeah, for sure.
What was different about Hotchkiss? Tell us about kind of the foundational things that you learned and developed there.
So I would say similar things. We're going to Allen Stevenson, but Hotchkiss being in boarding school, it's even exacerbated because you're around everybody smart, right? So you're like, wait a minute, everybody's smart here. It's not just like, you know, a few people or a handful, and people are from all over the world, right? So in my dorm, upper mid-year, so junior year at Hotchkiss, I mean, it was Renee Schwassel from Austria, it was Shavar Thomas from Jamaica, it was Bahamas, Bermuda, Scotland, Hong Kong, Long Island, California. I'm forgetting a couple of places, but you're talking about waking up, going to bed, hanging out, working, playing sports, literally with really bright, hardworking kids from all over the world that all had their own periods, giving them that same story and stuff like that. So just ultra competitive, but collaborative at the same time. And so I think that was, you know, for sure the most formative years of my life.
And I imagine maybe developed a network of friends from there. Are you still in touch with folks?
Oh, of course, yeah. I still talk to I would say on a weekly basis to several of my friends from Hotchkiss. I wouldn't be here today if I wasn't there. Even my co-founder in my tech startup lived in my dorm that my senior year, not my junior year.
Did you know each other when you were in high school?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay,
So I was the guy. I was the guy. I think one of the things that I prided myself in high school, and I think it's kind of lent itself. I think I was like the cool athletic nerd, right? So like I was cool enough to be cool, and I was a pretty good athlete. But like I was the guy, hanging out with the quote unquote nerdy kids in the dorm, playing video games and stuff like that. So I had a pretty broad sector of friends, and I think that's boded well for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that your co-founder is from Hotchkiss, and we're going to come back to obviously that origin story, but let's talk about your time at UConn, and I believe that's when you first actually started your own ventures?
Yeah, so I ran track at UConn. That's where my wife, she ran track at UConn as well. She was better than I was though. Um, and I pledged Alpha, so Alpha Phi Alpha at UConn, and junior year with track, kind of hurt my knee. I wasn't that, in high school I can count how many times I lost on one hand. I don't really need one hand to count how many times I won in college, right? That's how big the jump was in terms of talent level. And so I just said to myself, I think I'm done with this. It wasn't, I didn't see a path forward for me. But you still had to pay for school, still had to do things. And I was like, oh, I know all the athletes in a fraternity. I kind of know all the girls. And if you can get the girls to come to a concert or a party, then all the boys come. If you get all the athletes, a lot of the girls come. And so I kind of said, oh, I can probably make money off of throwing stuff. And I ended up promoting concerts and parties all throughout Connecticut, Western Massachusetts, and did pretty well doing that, and then turned that into a nightclub and stuff after.
Yeah, so you graduated and started a nightclub. I need to hear more about this because the concept of a nightclub in stores, tell me how that worked.
Yeah, so what you have to realize is that Hartford is far. I mean, particularly when most kids don't even have a car. And so there was a big opportunity. You kind of have this captive audience. At the same time, UConn is kind of the hub for, if you're between 18 and 22, people want to go to UConn, right? So you have Eastern Connecticut State University. There's kids from Trinity College and other schools that would want to go to UConn. It was the cool place to be, but with not a lot of options. And so there was just a captive market and opportunity. I think the biggest thing though from the club is cool and sexy, and then I opened up a restaurant too, so all the profit from the club was lost in the restaurant. But that's a whole other story. But I think the biggest thing that I learned from that, right, is and probably even more so the restaurant than the club. I'd never worked in a restaurant before, right, and so here's me. At the time I opened it, I was working at Ameriprise Financial. So I was probably putting in like 60, 70 hours a week on the financial side. Like I'd go to the office by 8 a.m. at the latest, probably leave at like 7 or 8 p.m. I'd drive from East Hartford up to stores, and then I would be either helping in the kitchen, helping. There was a thing. This is predates like DoorDash and stuff like that. There was this thing called Campus Foods, where people could order on the website, and then it would fax you, and we had a fax machine in the kitchen,
Nice.
what their order was. And so I remember the day we turned on Campus Food, right? So we're understaffed in the kitchen. We have a packed restaurant bar because it was like a big UConn game on or something. And then all of a sudden we have deliveries coming through, and we have one delivery driver. And I just remember like getting there from office, like in my full suit, and then like driving deliveries. And so I think the biggest takeaway that I got from that, no one complained about having to do extra jobs or do extra things. Like, oh, you're the chef? Like, hey, you're also the waiter, because we don't have, no one complains about doing more or working harder when they see you coming from work, driving 40 minutes or whatever, 30 minutes, and then jumping in and doing stuff too. And I think that has helped me, whether it's in finance or with a tech startup or anything. Like, people work hard when they see the person leading working hard. And so I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that I get from that.
Yeah. That seems like a great lesson to take away from that. What happened with the nightclub?
That's a whole other long story. Another lesson that I learned as in my early 20s is the importance of hiring a good lawyer. And I also learned that some investors are real sharks and try to take advantage of you. So the lesson that I learned in the nightclub was I probably should have been a multimillionaire by the time I was like 24 or 25, but instead I'm not. I am now, but I I wasn't then. And partially because I didn't do the right things legally, and I had an investor that actually did some shady things, and so we'll move on from there. But again, those are. But it's funny because when you then have a tech startup, when you do other stuff, and you have that memory in your mind from 12 years earlier or 10 years earlier, you make sure you have your patents, and you make sure that you have your non-disclosure agreements with your partners, so they can't release your trade secrets. Like, you're a lot more protective. And frankly, there's things that worked out well for me on the tech side in my 30s that, had I not had some of those mishaps or frankly get screwed over by people in my 20s, I may not have been prepared, and it would hurt me 100 times more. So.
It's nice to be able to look on the bright side from this side of things. That does sound like a great lesson to have learned. So after college, you worked in wealth management, and it sounds like it was another kind of job where you could learn a lot about how business works, how the world works. Give us some of your takeaways from that experience.
So I started off as a financial advisor at Ameriprise Financial. I then ended up at JP Morgan. I see a buddy of mine over there I haven't seen in like a decade. And I think a couple takeaways. So 2008, financial crisis. You have clients losing, literally tons of money, 30%, 40% of everything they've saved up their whole life, like that. And you have so many people, advisors, running scared, not wanting to pick up the phone. I built my entire business in 2008 because I wasn't afraid to pick up the phone. Like, I was the guy calling, dialing, oh, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Joe, how's things going? And no, I haven't heard from my guy at XYZ firm, and he can't get a hold of me. And I'd say, well, here's what I'm doing. And so I also didn't lose one client in 2008 because I picked up the phone and I understood what their plan was. Hey, you're saving for retirement, or your daughter's wedding is next year. Don't worry, Ms. Johnson, we can still pay for the wedding, and you can still retire even though you've lost XYZ money. And so I think the big takeaway from that was, people are okay with bad news. They're just not okay with bullshit, right? Or they're just not okay with you hiding. People, like, we're all grown-ups here. People, everybody. I don't care if you've, came from the wealthiest family in the world, or you came from the poorest country in the world. Like, everybody has dealt with bad news, right? Whether it's life, it's health, it's relationships, it's work, it's whatever. I think people just respect that honesty, and then they can plan and adjust. And so I think that, for me, was the biggest thing. It just helped me be more direct, and understand the value of that. I think the second thing, and this was more so later on at JP Morgan, is I'm 28 years old, 29 years old, VP of investments at JP Morgan, managing 9 figures in assets and I was, my office then was in Katona. And so I'm covering Katona, New York, Chappaqua. I lived in Danbury at the time, but I was covering northern Westchester, from part of Bedford, Katona, Chappaqua. So some of the most affluent areas in the country. And I'm, this 29-year-old kid. And I think it helped learn how to deal with really wealthy people with big egos. But I think I had a foundation of that also from going to Hotchkiss and going to other stuff. So it wasn't brand new to me, but it's different when you're 29 and you're dealing with a 60-year-old person worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And for that, what I learned is that you don't have to know everything, but whatever you know, you better be really tight on. And you need to be resourceful enough to find the answers to things you don't know. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. You can't BS extremely successful people. Mm-hmm. You just say, here's what I do know, and what I can't answer for you, I have the resources to figure that out. And so the combination of like being direct, not being afraid to say bad news, being confident about what you know, and then being relentless at getting the answers to things that you don't know. Like I don't know, like those are just fundamental things in how I operate. So.
Yeah. Also, I just want to reiterate for all the young people in the audience, pick up the phone. I feel like there's a generation that it's a little uncomfortable with that, and it's a good skill. It's not easy, but as Andre tells us, it's very valuable. So okay, let's talk about the idea and the origins of True Optic. So you're working in wealth management. As I understand, there was sort of a trial and error process of coming up with this idea. So walk us through that.
So you see some of these same clients in Westchester and some in Fairfield County, and they're coming to you and they're saying, hey, I need to get $500,000 out. I'm investing in, my next door neighbor's son is going to be the next Zuckerberg or something like that. And then you hear the idea, and it's the dumbest idea that you've ever, you're saying to yourself, this makes no sense. This company makes no sense. That 23-year-old kid is going to lose all your money. He has no idea what he's talking about, but it's people's money. You can give them some general, like, well, here's, what I'm thinking, but if somebody wants their money, you get their money. And then that's when your own ego kicks in. And I'm saying to myself, if these kids that know nothing about nothing, right, can raise millions of dollars from these people and start companies, why can't I start a company? And then what I had seen with the nightclub and restaurants, but more so even with the concerts that I produced and promoted, is when you're talking about, 2001 to 2005, you're advertising, you have a street team. You want to throw a concert, you have a street team handing out flyers at the let out to all the bars and the other concerts, putting flyers on people's windshield wipers. You're buying an ad in the newspaper, in the entertainment section, big color ad so people can really see it. And you're buying tons of radio advertisement. That's how you promote a big concert or a party or something. What I started to see was that shifting to social media. This is right when people started advertising on social media. This is when people started, particularly younger people, millennials back then, although like I'm a 40-something-year-old millennial now, but back then millennials were the young folks.
We were the young folks.
And you were seeing people starting to stream radio, right? So the same station that they were always listening to, but they're listening to it at, while they're working on their laptop. And so I saw the way that people were advertising starting to shift. And I'd heard that a lot of those same streaming capabilities, when the bandwidth increased, because remember back then it was bandwidth to stream, when the bandwidth increased was going to shift to TV and video. And so I knew that was an opportunity there. The challenge was, I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to code, can't, develop things. But I said to myself, I got to find somebody really smart who could actually execute on this idea. And I was like, all right, well, who's the smartest person I know? And it was the kid from Long Island, the Ukrainian American kid from Long Island that lived across the hall from me, that we would hang out and play video games, and I'd eat his M&Ms in the dorm. That he went to Carnegie Mellon, was a mathematician, mechanical engineer, comp-sci guy. And I hit him up and I said, hey, I got this idea. And I'll never forget, he goes, oh yeah, I can build that. It was just like very dismissive, like, oh, easy, I can build that. It was much harder than both of us could have imagined. It was harder for me to raise the capital. It was harder for him to build everything, but he built it, and we raised the capital. Now, the original idea to get from point A to point Z, it wasn't a straight line. It was like this. Right. And we had to build some other interim products just to generate revenue before we could get to the final goal. I wasn't able to raise as much capital as I thought I could. We got a lot of capital from individual angel investors that were cutting checks between like $50,000 and $500,000, but we couldn't get institutional capital. I mean, every major venture capital firm turned us down.
So I want to come back to that, but before we talk about the fundraising part of the journey, can you tell us what True Optic is?
Did. So we sold it to TransUnion. So it exists as a product for them, but it's no longer a standalone company after we sold it in 2020. But what True Optic is, and I'll say with the tagline, and then I'll try to say it in layman's terms. So it did identity resolution to power advertising across streaming media. What that really means is we helped segment audiences for targeted advertising. So on smart TVs and on smart speakers or in gaming consoles. So if you were watching, does anybody watch like Pluto TV or Tubi TV or Peacock or Crackle or any of those streaming services? We were the ones that on the back end would say, oh, this is a household with over 100K income, or this is a household that has a car lease expiring, or this is a household that likes action adventure movies. So they would know, well, what movie trailer to advertise to that household, or they would know, hey, advertise the Mercedes to this household, or things like that. And so we did all of that in real time on the back end to be able to get that data so that people could bid on how much they wanted to pay to show your household an ad.
I think what's just what I want to just point out is like something like that even 5 years earlier wasn't even a concept, right? All this, well, maybe it was, but just the media world was moving so quickly, and you identified something and a way to kind of connect with customers and then monetize it, I suppose. That just, it was a new concept. You, as you said before, like you cornered this very specific thing. So when you went out, tell us about kind of like the pitch, and then we can get into the fundraising challenges that you had.
So originally the pitch was more around there is billions of dollars of unmonetized media consumption in the United States. So there's people watching content, but the people that own that content aren't making money off of it. That worked a little bit. It didn't work as well. I thought it was excellent. I was like, sounds great. Wasn't the winning pitch. We got some money off of it and some traction. Understanding what the problem is, and then we were able to provide a lot of data to help support people solving that problem. Very little bit of traction, but not enough. Mm-hmm. Where things really took off for us is when we just said, you know what, instead of telling you what the problem is and giving you the data to understand the problem, we're just going to build a solution for the problem. So when it really worked, it was like, oh, hey, we can help you make, millions of dollars off the people watching your content. Or we can help you increase what you're monetizing your content by 40%. Then it was like, okay, yeah, I'm ready. So sometimes, this is another lesson that I've learned, is sometimes you have to do it for people. You have to be the solution. Sometimes you can be the widget, or sometimes you can be a part of the solution, and sometimes you just have to be the whole thing yourself in order to be successful.
So let's talk about the fundraising journey. You have said that sometimes it was hard just getting in the room with the right people. Tell us about kind of the challenges you faced.
Yeah, look, I'm very direct about it. I know there's a lot of, over the last few years, a lot of pushback on things like DEI, and it's like a bad word and stuff like that. But I'll just be very blunt. I was not able to get a lot of venture capital meetings because the venture capital community doesn't really invest in Black people, right? Like, it's just a fact, right? It's 0.19% of venture capital went to Black founders. They don't really invest in women either. If you're a Latino woman, it's not measurable yet. Like, it's so close to zero that there's not a 0.1 or something. And so, there's other challenges if you live in certain parts of the country, right? If you live in a rural part of the South, you're not raising capital. It doesn't matter, even if you're a white male, right? So I'm not saying that there's not challenges for everybody, but the challenge for me was I could not even get a meeting with a lot of the firms to make the pitch. So there was no opportunity to show the merit of my ideas or intellectual property or stuff like that because I couldn't get into the room. Fortunately, we were able to raise capital from individuals, right? And frankly, the majority of which were white males, right? So, but they weren't at the institutionals. These were people that, you know, live in the town or do what have you. Our first angel investor was actually Christy Mattis, who at the time was the CFO of, or the Chief Administrative Officer of Aetna. She was our first check. I don't know if at the time she knew it was our first check, but she was our first check, and made some introductions for us that just kind of changed our whole trajectory. Our first institutional investor, because again, we could not get any venture capital meetings, was the state of Connecticut. So Connecticut Innovation Fund, which is a fund that's made for economic development in the state of Connecticut, actually did a matching funds check of, I think, $150,000 back in 2013. Oh. And at the time, it was like, I thought we made it. I was like, we got $150,000. We had a check from Christie. And these are how, you know, I'll tell you a funny things, how things happen. So we were struggling along. I'd spent, my co-founder had spent a ton of his own money. I had depleted all of everything I had saved up, life savings gone. Had, you know, 2 small kids. My wife was working at Danbury Hospital at the time. And Danbury Hospital and Norwalk Hospital like merged, and I think Nuvance, or I don't remember all the specifics, but Danbury and Norwalk merged. And then in her department, she was the most junior person in terms of the amount of time that she'd been working there. And they essentially let her go and offered her same job back, making like 30 or 40 grand less a year for her same exact job. It's like, oh, great. You're not fired. You're just being kind of rehired. That's some foolishness that they said. And so it's a gut check moment, right? Because totally. Like, damn, we don't have, our money saved is gone. Our only source of income, because it wasn't like I was able to pay myself in this startup that wasn't making really money yet, is now gone down significantly. And then we got the lifeline, right? With Christie investing, and then Connecticut Innovations investing. And then interestingly, a few months later, Christie Mattis' daughter actually went to Hotchkiss. At that time, she's on the sidelines of, I don't remember if it was a field hockey match or lacrosse match, and she just meets another parent. And they're just talking about, you know, what they do. And she's saying, oh, you know, I just angel invested in a couple Hotchkiss alum, and they're building something. He's like, I'm a venture capitalist. I only invest in the media and entertainment industry. Could you give me an introduction? Gives us an introduction. A few weeks later, he puts $500,000 into the company. And then we had a couple other folks follow. And then we're off to the races. That's
so wild. I mean, just the number of kind of.
And so that's why I say, if I didn't go to Hotchkiss, right, I probably wouldn't be here. Not only because of the network that I met, my co-founder, but frankly, the ability to get capital. And so I think, just to like belabor this point, I am not the most impressive person I know, right? I know a lot of people that I just think are, you know, brilliant. I literally would have been out of business if I did not go to a specific prep school and have a specific network, because I couldn't get into meetings on the merit of what I had actually done, right? So my network, frankly, saved me and gave me an opportunity.
Now, I want to ask, you know, and that is certainly a large part of the answer to this question, but you know, you started your business in Connecticut. What else about Connecticut is kind of helped you kind of grow and build that business?
I mean, I love Connecticut. I know a lot of people, even Connecticut residents, talk smack about Connecticut, you know, but, you know, like, I love it here. So here's a couple of things about Connecticut. Connecticut is what I believe, and, you know, somebody could fact check this, is the second most educated state in America.
Very highly educated, yeah.
Right? So when you talk about starting a business in Connecticut, having a really high quality base of people to hire helps. That doesn't hurt, right? So there's that. Um, Connecticut is about middle of the road in terms of racial diversity in the country, but when it comes to ethnic diversity, it's actually one of the most diverse places like in the world, right? So when you talk about, and this relates back to soccer. So
Yeah.
let me come back to the, when we get to soccer, remind me to bring up the point about the cultural diversity here. And so there's that. There's some of the top universities in the country. I think proximity to New York helps, right? So we were able to attract a lot of talent to the company of people that lived in Fairfield County or in Westchester County, particularly in their 30s and 40s with kids that were tired of commuting into Manhattan and loved the idea of like just driving into Stanford and, oh, I can make it back to my kids' like game at 3:30, and if I need to, I come back at 5:30. You're not leaving the office in Manhattan and hopping on the Metro North and come, and and so we benefited from, I think, a strong work base, proximity to New York, but not being New York.
Exactly.
actually helped as well. I think the transportation infrastructure in Connecticut is a lot better than people give credit to. So a lot of our younger employees may have lived in New Haven or Bridgeport or Norwalk, and just hop on the Metro North into the office. And so I think there's a lot of things about Connecticut. One, just an affinity going to boarding school in Connecticut and then going to UConn, but also it just felt like a much more efficient place to start a business than New York.
I like that. That's fascinating. So let's talk about this place. You mentioned an office in Stamford. So one thing I'm curious about is sort of what the office was like when you were getting this going. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs have the story about starting in their garage and so on. What physically was actually your office in the early days, and where did you go from there?
So, a couple of things. So, well, our first offices for the first year was my co-founder's office in his house, and it was my basement at my place in Danbury. So it was working remote, just the two of us at first. Then we had an office actually in Hartford for a little while, not long, maybe 6 months. And then that's when Connecticut Innovations made the investment. They recommended a place in Stamford, which was frankly closer to both of us than Hartford was. The Stanford Innovation Center. I don't know if it's still open. I don't think it is. But the old City Hall in Stanford is probably 5 blocks from here.
Yeah.
And it was like a co-working space for startups. And it's crazy because that year that we were there, I think 2013 and 2014 in the Stanford Innovation Center, there was probably 10 startups, and probably 3 or 4 of them have sold for a significant amount of money.
Wow.
And it was just 10 of us are in a big building, but our room was 380 square feet, right? So we called it the shoebox because it was literally just a perfect rectangle, and it was tiny. And we were able to fit 10 tables in there, all touching. And we were in there until we hired the 11th person. And we're like, we can't fit in here. And then we got another office on Summer Street, the old YWCA building. Is a really, really cool office. And so what I think was exciting is even when we first started the company, we couldn't afford to pay people. So
wow. Okay.
we were paying people, I mean, minimal money. Like, I don't even want to say it was low. Like, but then we paid them in stock. Worked out really well for them 7 years later. But it's like the dedication. Everybody was bought in. Everybody was getting literally barely enough to survive, and this stock. And so when everybody believes and frankly is dependent on, and many of us, on the success of the company to survive or to do well or to make it worth the sacrifice, everybody's locked in. So,
yeah, well, yeah, that makes sense. There's a bit of lore I wanted to ask you about. What was the Wi-Fi password at your office?
So yeah, I'm a big call your shots guy. Some people may call it arrogant or smack talker. But I grew up in a neighborhood too in the Bronx where, you know, if you talk, you better back it up, right? Like, and so I know that, but our Wi-Fi password was what we were going to exit for, right? And it was somewhat intentional because I wanted everybody in the team that when they get there, that first time they're working, what's the Wi-Fi? Here's the Wi-Fi, right? And then everybody that came, and we different variations of that stayed the Wi-Fi password all the way through. And then we literally exited for what we said 7 years earlier is what we were going to be able to sell the company for.
So good. Such a good story. And for those who don't know the term exited for, it just means that's how much money you got for the company.
How much we sold the company for. So like, you know, you can see even with the soccer or the new tech venture that I'll be starting soon, or it's already started, but I'll be coming out of hiding secret mode soon. I call my shots. Like with the soccer, I said a year and a half ago what I'm going to do, and I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's talk about, we've talked about a lot of your backstory. You sold the company for a 9-figure number. And then you started the Swanston organization. So tell us what you guys do there. Oh, and also shout out to your wife, Michelle, who we haven't even talked about, but was a huge part of the company.
Thanks for reminding me. And I was going to get to that. I have mentioned that. I mentioned that, but I'm going to do a better job. Not you.
Well, let's take it away. Let's tell us about her.
So, well, a couple of things in the framework of everything that I've done, and what Michelle will remind me of, or everything that's been successful that I've done, she's been a part of, right? So we met at UConn when I was throwing big concerts and big events and stuff like that. We quickly learned that you can't be anywhere. I couldn't be anywhere near the door because everybody's like, hey, Dre, hey, you know, let me get in. Oh, I got this extra person. And so I would go into hiding in the back, and she would be the one to operate and make sure that, you know, everything was going. And then that led to same thing with the nightclub and the restaurant. And then what I didn't finish saying, the story about Danbury Hospital and Norwalk merging and then her offering her a job, she didn't take it. She was like, you know what you're working on, I believe in that. I also don't think you and your co-founder are that organized. And so since we we got a lot riding on this, I'm going to come in. She ended up being the chief client officer. She actually taught herself how to code and built one of our first websites and managed that. She by the time we exited and we went to TransUnion, she was actually, frankly, in terms of the day-to-day operations, more important than I was. And so after the exit, I left after 2 years. She stayed a little bit longer, and she ran the data marketplace at TransUnion. And so she's exceptional. I'm more of the talker. She likes to more be behind the scenes, so that works out pretty well. And then with the Swanston organization, we have this, both of us, chip on our shoulder. So we know how hard it was for us to raise capital. And so what we decided is that we were going to do a couple things. We were going to invest in female and minority founders. So about 70 to 80% of our investments would go to females or minority entrepreneurs. We also knew that the opportunities that we got, particularly academic opportunities like scholarship to Hotchkiss, and she was benefited from the Horde Foundation on her end growing up in Danbury. So we've made sure to donate back to them. So we started an endowed scholarship at the Hotchkiss School. We've done, other stuff of that nature. So those are two things. It was like giving people a chance, entrepreneurs a chance that we know we were very close to not getting a chance and not being able to be successful. And then, going back to that thing from my dad, like education's a great equalizer. So giving people opportunities for that. And then the third pillar of that is Connecticut Sports Group, where we've started the soccer endeavor.
Right. So I'm like, which of these should we talk about first? I did want to hear about, there's a couple companies, Afroland TV and FitMatch, that you've invested in. Like, tell us about a little bit of the type of companies that you look for and the type of people that make good entrepreneurs and what those companies are doing.
Yeah, so I've had the been fortunate enough to meet some really clever founders, hardworking folks. I've also met some that have great ideas, but they're not necessarily the right person. I think with Afroland, Michael and his team have been great, and done a good job. They recently actually sold the company a few months ago to a bigger company. And with FitMatch, this was actually an introduction from a buddy of mine that lived in that same dorm, that same floor. Actually, no, Alex lived the floor below us, but same dorm at Hotchkiss. He ended up being on the Jamaican national team in soccer and playing in MLS and stuff like that. A friend of his that went to Williams with him has this like AI startup that you learn stuff every day from people. So what is the biggest like cost for e-commerce companies? Can anybody guess? Like the biggest cost for e-commerce company or area of potential loss? Yes, returns. Returns.
Right.
And the returns are really, really high, in particular when it comes to clothing, because people order stuff and then it doesn't fit right, right? And so this company, FitMatch, uses LiDAR technology, so like with lasers and stuff like that, and you can even use it with your iPhone, or there's other machines that can do it to essentially scan your body, and then they're able to match it with AI to understand how clothing would look on you or fit you. And so they're able to lower the return rates by like 40% for a lot of their customers. But then on top of that, they're able to do body scanning and track it over time to see how training is affecting an athlete in terms of muscle development or recovery from injury or surgeries. Do things to build like 3D. I don't remember what the term is, but 3D things that would go to like, your nose or your eye sockets or stuff like that. And so I'm always impressed by people that come up with ideas and find solutions to problems that I didn't even really understand those problems were that big, but they've already solved a problem for it. And so just really impressive guys. So we were fortunate to invest in them. And look, we've had some ones where I wish we hadn't invested in some companies. Those are two of the good ones. We've had some where you could be a great founder and have a great idea and work really hard and still not be successful. And it doesn't matter what race you are, what gender you are, how much money you like. I have friends that are brilliant, hardworking, come from a lot of money, and have failed in their companies, right? So it doesn't matter who you are. Being an entrepreneur is hard. I don't mind if you make the right investment or right call, but it just doesn't work out, because that's inevitable. Sometimes it's not going to work out. Where I have been frustrated is a couple times where I've invested in people where I'm like, oh man, I knew he or she wasn't the one. Like I knew they didn't have it, but I fell in love with the idea. I fell in love with the potential of the company. And what Michelle has analyzed and informed me of is you can't look at it as how would you run the company and, oh, based on their idea or their technology and what I would do, it could accomplish this. You have to look at it like based off of them, what can they do? And so that I think has been
That's
a
really
good learning
interesting.
lesson.
I mean, I imagine a lot of investors have to kind of learn that lesson too, because they probably get excited about an idea, like you said, and think they could they can make it
So
happen.
you learn every day, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. We're close to time, and I want to make sure we cover your new venture and what's going on with the team. So I'll let you decide which one to tell us about first.
Soccer. We're going to talk about soccer
Let's
because
do it.
nobody cares about some new tech startup I'm starting, right? So Connecticut is the largest, most densely populated, most affluent market in America without any of the top 5 major sporting leagues. We have no NFL, no NBA, no MLB, no NHL, no MLS. It's absurd, right? We get caught in between New York and Boston. Boston is far. And New York is a pain to get to go to any sporting event. And half the attendance for New York sporting events isn't even in New York. It's 2 states away in New Jersey, right? So Connecticut residents spend over $1 billion a year on sports and entertainment and sports merchandise. The majority of that money leaves the state and goes to New York, New Jersey, and Boston, right? So I just said to myself, wait a minute, we have all these fans. We have 3.6 million people. I'm giving you all these stats, but the state of Connecticut is 3.6 million people in 5,400 square miles. If I look at Major League Soccer, and I look at the most recent expansion markets, Nashville, St. Louis, Austin, those metropolitan areas, the counties that make up metropolitan Nashville, metropolitan St. Louis, are over 6,000 square miles. So those metro areas are bigger than the whole state of Connecticut. And they have like 3 million to 3.3 million people. So you're talking about these markets that we think are so big. St. Louis is so big, Nashville is so booming and stuff like that. They're smaller, less affluent markets than Connecticut. And oh, by the way, they already have Major League Baseball teams or NFL teams or NHL hockey teams or multiple of the above. And we have 0, right? And so it's just simple supply and demand, right? And so that was really the big opportunity. That's not to mention you have the World Cup coming next year. You have the Club World Cup coming this year. So the growth of soccer, Connecticut has one of the higher soccer youth participation rates. And then I said, to remind me about the cultural diversity, here's the thing that I think is underappreciated about Connecticut. Connecticut per capita is the most Italian state in America. That's probably why they say New Haven's the best pizza, right? Like, it's something like 16% of the state of Connecticut identifies as Italian American. That's a higher percentage than New York or New Jersey or Pennsylvania. Connecticut has one of the highest percentages of Polish Americans is in Connecticut. Portuguese Americans, Brazilian Americans, Jamaican Americans, like and guess what all these ethnicities have in common? They love soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, they love it, right? And so that's a reason why not only do you have the population, not only do you not have enough teams, but you have a rabid, like, soccer-loving fan base that it's like they really care about it and passionate about it. And so when you look at all those things, it just seems, I don't feel like some genius for thinking we should bring soccer. It almost feels like crazy that no one else has tried to bring MLS. The last thing I'll say is, because a lot of people have asked, I'm kind of like previewing what some of the questions I've gotten before on this is like, why Bridgeport? Why not put it in Hartford or Stamford or New Haven or Danbury? And so a couple of reasons on that. I don't think people appreciate let me start with this. We really wanted to build a team that could be for the whole state, right? Connecticut is big, unified as one. There's no city that by itself can support a full major league team. It really needs to be Connecticut United. I know it's cliche because there's Manchester United and those things, but we named it that because we're saying Connecticut United as one is big enough and powerful enough to be on the big stage with any other market. And Bridgeport, if you dropped a pin in the middle of Connecticut, it wouldn't be geographically Bridgeport. But if you drop the pin in the middle of the population of Connecticut, it is Bridgeport, right? Pretty much every major population spot density in the state of Connecticut is within 60 minutes of Bridgeport, just about everywhere, right? Also, Bridgeport has an unmatched transportation infrastructure of any city in this state, right? So they have I-95 flows through it. You have the Port Jefferson Ferry from Long Island. You have a express stop on Amtrak. You have Metro North. There's 2 regional airports within 20 minutes. You can go on and on and on and on. You can't build that. It would take hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, to recreate that somewhere else. And then lastly, I'm the kid with the chip on the shoulder from the Bronx that wasn't supposed to be here. So there's a part of me that's just like, you know what? Yeah, this neighborhood that has been underinvested in for decade after decade after decade, and people that need opportunities for jobs and all the good that can come from something like this, the revitalization of that urban community. There's something about that that's very appealing to me on a personal level. And so when you put all of those things combined, it was, we're bringing MLS to Bridgeport on the water, building a stadium, which is a catalyst to a lot of other economic development.
And I know a lot of people are excited about this. I have questions, but you know what? It's 8, but I want to give an opportunity to some folks in the audience if you would like to ask a question. Robert is there with a mic. Do we have 1 or 2 people who want to ask something of Andre? Robert's.
How you doing? Name's Lucas. I was wondering if you could talk more about your original inception of your idea. We kind of got a little bit of the background where you did the marketing for the clubs, and then you learned how to speak to wealthier people for finding other sources of income. And then what was the real, and then the radio, you mentioned the Pandora at the time. When did the idea click that we should be targeting ads to all these, Pluto, Fire TV, whatever? Where was that spark where you saw the inefficiency?
Yeah, so the general opportunity, I can't say there's one moment where I was like, oh, the idea just popped in my head, but the possibility of how data could be used to influence the monetization of media and entertainment, and the belief that media and entertainment was going to shift more and more to streaming, that came from all the things you just mentioned. I think where we made the light switch to really build the full solution and go into advertising was we had licensed some streaming consumption and like downloading data for one of the agencies in Group M. Group M at the time was the largest like agency holding group in America. And they introduced us to one of their subsidiaries in Brazil. And we analyzed all the data for Brazil. We had already automated a lot of that stuff. It wasn't a lot of work for us. It probably took us like an hour, and we charged them $25,000. And I remember I took the whole office out to Buffalo Wild Wings, right around the corner on Summer Street. And I remember just feeling like, man, we just made $25,000 for an hour of work. Like, we're winning. Like, this is amazing, right? And then a couple months later, they were giving us the recap of how the data was used, and they were just like, it was great. You powered this $10 million campaign in Brazil, and everybody's so excited. I'm like, wait a minute. You guys spent $10 million off of our $25,000 in data, and the agencies typically make about 8 to 10% commission on that. And I realized we were the losers. Like, we provided all the data, all the value, and we made chump change. And that's when I was like, okay, we've got to get further up in this funnel to benefit more from the value that we're creating. So that was the light switch where like the product journey changed. So yeah.
Building on what you just alluded to, your very first iteration of a product isn't the thing that's really the thing that works in a big way, right? Because there's a lot of iteration and adapt. So when you look at startups and young companies now, you assess the idea, you assess the people, but how do you assess their ability to never get it right the first time when you start the product, but to iterate to the thing that will be right?
That's a good question. I don't know that I've ever thought about exactly the way that you're phrasing it. I can say what I've noticed, this is me thinking about this live on the spot, but there's probably like 3 types of founders or founding teams that I've noticed, right? Or even as I think about some of the people that I came up with, they're the ones that are so stubborn and so locked into the way that they want to do it that it doesn't matter the circumstances changing around them. They just have to do it the way that they believe in. Then there's, to the other extreme, there's the ones that will literally change what they're doing depending on who they talk to last or who cut them the bigger check. They have no conviction in what exactly how they're going to execute on something. They may have conviction in, hey, I want to accomplish X, Y, and Z, but they'll go any which way to get there based off of, you know, what they come across. And then there's the people in the middle where sometimes they're like, no, I don't care what you say, I'm doing it this way. Or they're able to say, adapt and be like, yeah, you know what, maybe I don't do it your way, but I'm thinking about it slightly different because of what you suggested, and so maybe I do it slightly differently. I think that's where I was, where there were times where I changed my mind, either because somebody on the team came up with an idea and I'm like, holy crap, yeah, no, we can do it that way, or let's do it in the middle of the way, or an investor. And there are times where folks on your team could say, or I remember a big board meeting where the whole board, everybody said, we shouldn't do a product. Don't do that. You're gonna lose focus on your core thing. But I just felt it was right. I knew it, but I also could see why because I had the financial projections of why it could make sense. I had the competitive analysis. Like I had all the reasons why if it didn't work out, I could like not get fired, right? And I did it anyway. But you know, so I think to me that's the difference. And when I talk about the founders that haven't been successful, it's the people at the 2 extremes. The ones to me that are the people that know when to listen and when to stick to their guns. Sorry.
We're gonna, oh, there.
I think there's one more. I feel bad because you're.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
One last question.
Thank you for being a Connecticut lover, and thank you for being a solutions provider. I feel like I share those with you.
Thanks.
Given that Connecticut also has the largest wealth gap in the country, what's the one fix or solution you would provide philanthropically to solve that problem?
That was a great question. And of course, I get the hardest question, or the one I fought to be able to get. You're supposed to give me a layup there. No, I'm teasing. So this may be, I don't know if this is a controversial answer, but I think the biggest solution to help the wealth gap is not philanthropic, right? So, and what I mean by that is, I think you've got to empower people to make money for themselves and long-term economic development for themselves, right? More so than like the giving. And so, like, for example, the scholarships I got helped me, and so that's philanthropic. So I'm not discrediting that. That is something that has to be done and stuff like that. But so, for example, when I look at, you see certain, all across the country, certain school districts that are underfunded, right? There's not a philanthropic solution to that, because the way that our system works is that the tax dollars in a town or city go to support the public school. There's no amount of money you can donate to solve that. The only way to solve that is to create jobs, economic opportunity in those areas so that they can have more tax revenue to support the reinvestment in their own community. And so to me, at scale, it's not just giving the scholarship to the 2% of kids that excel in their neighborhood and then get them to go to private schools and most of the time not come back to their neighborhood, right? Because they want to go off to this college or university or they get this job. It is how do we make that neighborhood someplace where people want to stay and want to live. And so if they have the educational opportunity in there and they have opportunity to create small businesses and jobs there, then it can change. So I don't think, I think it's not philanthropic, but you know, I don't know if that, does that make sense? Oh, well, thank you. I thought it was a very hard question, but I feel a lot of conviction around my answer, so I'm happy that it makes sense.
I love that. Love sparking the conversation. All right. Well, I want to thank the Ferguson Library for their hospitality and their support of this event. I'd like to mention in particular the library's CEO, Alice Knapp, and thanks to Chris Vincent, Barbara Buck, Dennis Sweeney, and Dante Pruitt. At the Connecticut Mirror, thanks to our publisher, Bruce Putterman, executive editor, Beth Hamilton, our director of revenue, Robert DeGioia, Claire Dignan, our director of philanthropy, Irene Mackey, manager of membership, Gabby DeBenedictis, manager of audience engagement, Chris Nilsson, director of operations, and the producer of the series, Harriet Jones. Thank you so much. You can read all the Connecticut Mirror's journalism at ctmirror.org, and you can donate to support our work at that website. Thank you for coming tonight, everyone.
Thank you.